Okay, it is 1:30, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Brandon, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So welcome and thank you for joining the public workshop on the draft construction stormwater general permit reissuance. My name is Amy Cronson and I'm the unit chief of the Industrial and Construction Stormwater Program at the State Water Resources Control Board. I'll be your facilitator for today. As we start this public workshop, I'd like to introduce our program staff. We have Brandon Rosenboom, who will be presenting information and answering questions. And then behind the scenes, we have Ella Galovi and Tiana Huling, as well as our Cal EPA webcasting staff. And we have Diana Messina, who's the section chief for the NPDES permitting unit here at the State Water Board. Next slide. So as an acknowledgement, I'd like to say we're hosting this meeting virtually from Sacramento. We welcome and thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your participation, and we know that people are still dealing with the continued impacts that the pandemic has had on our communities, and we just acknowledge that it takes a lot to be here today. So for the water board's mission is to preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources for the benefit of present and future generations, which is why we want to begin this meeting by acknowledging the groups who have and who continue to experience economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization and whose daily lives are impacted by racism and injustices. As a reminder, our work here today should strengthen the empowerment of community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, and affordable water to all Californians. The purpose of today's workshop is to be providing information, answering questions, and listening to your feedback regarding the draft construction stormwater general permit that was noticed on May 28th, 2021. The draft technical documents can be found on our program's webpage. There's a link here in the slides once we publish those, but it's also available through the public notice for which you may have heard about this workshop. Also a note, the State Water Board members may be in attendance today, but there will be no action taken, and this is not a hearing. So some meeting logistics. This workshop is being recorded and webcast. So if you're on the Zoom version, it's going to be recorded, and then everything is webcast through our normal Cal EPA webcast. This is an informal discussion, no written responses to comments, and there will be no formal action taken. Questions will be answered to the best of staff's ability. If we need to follow up on something with you, we will absolutely do that. There will be a break during the question and answer period, and the PowerPoint presentation will be provided on the State Water Board's construction permit reissuance webpage. Once this PowerPoint is published, that'll be a link as well. And then please consider signing up on the website's LIRIS email subscription for further updates. And that information is in the public notice as well. So today we have two meeting options. One is the Cal EPA webcast, which you can just watch live from your computer. The other is the interactive Zoom meeting. This Zoom meeting is limited to 300 participants. We've not reached that cap yet, but we will be taking comments and questions through the Zoom meeting. If you registered for the Zoom meeting, you've received that link and you're able to put questions in the chat box. If you would rather join the Cal EPA webcast, that link is there. And for technical assistance, please contact the Stormwater Help Desk, stormwater@waterboards.ca.gov with this particular subject line. And some of my staff will get back to you as soon as possible, or they can make us aware of your question or your issues and we can address it at that time. So for Zoom participants, if you'd like to ask a question or enter a comment, just click on the chat icon. It's the bottom middle of your screen there. Enter your question or feedback, and then you can also indicate if you'd like to present the question or feedback verbally yourself, in which case we can unmute you and you have 1 minute to ask that question or make that comment. And all that being said, here's an agenda for today. We're doing welcome and introductions now. Brandon will be giving the staff presentation. Then we'll have question and answers with a break, continued questions, and then we will show the next steps for the permitting process. And again, this is the first of 2 workshops. There's one more tomorrow. It's all the same information, same presentation and everything, but it gives you an opportunity to maybe come in and out if you need to. And if you miss something today, you can come tomorrow. With that being said, I'd love to introduce you to Brandon Rosenboom. He's a water resource control engineer and the lead staff on the construction general permit program here at State Water Board. So take it away, Brandon.
All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're ready for an information-packed presentation today. So first off, we're going to start off with a little bit of background about the the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program and the construction stormwater permit that's part of it. So the Federal Clean Water Act prohibits certain discharges of stormwater containing pollutants to waters of the United States, except those in compliance with a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. The State Water Board adopted the existing National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Construction Stormwater General Permit, Order 2009-009 DWQ, which was amended in 2010 and 2012, to regulate stormwater discharges associated with construction activities disturbing 1 or more acres. The existing construction stormwater general permit expired in September of 2014 and has been administratively extended until the effective date of a new construction stormwater general permit. We have learned a lot through the past 11 plus years of implementing the existing construction stormwater general permit, what has been working and what hasn't. Therefore, we are proposing a number of changes for the reissuance of this construction stormwater general permit. The primary topics that we will be covering in today's workshop include a reorganization of the draft permit, passive treatment technology use requirements, total maximum daily load implementation requirements, statewide water quality control plan implementation requirements, dewatering activity requirements, demolition activity requirements, and continuing on, criteria for a notice of non-applicability, revisions to the notice of termination process, the incorporation of a sufficiently sensitive test methods rule, revisions to our monitoring and reporting requirements, and the removal of the bioassessment monitoring requirements, as well as rain event action plans. As you can see, we have a lot to cover. This list is very similar to what we discussed in December of 2020. However, for each topic, I'll be highlighting some of the changes between the May 2021 draft and the preliminary staff draft that we released in November, based on the feedback that we have received from our interested parties. All right, so for those of you who are used to the 2009 construction stormwater general permit, you may have noticed a difference in the organization of the permit requirements. Throughout the implementation cycle of the current permit, we have heard feedback that it is difficult to navigate the requirements, so we've done some reorganization in an attempt to address this. In the order, we start off with the findings, then defining which projects require coverage under the permit, and then the processes regarding applying, revising, and terminating permit coverage, and then followed by the general requirements that apply to all dischargers. From there, requirements are broken out into attachments specific to various risk levels and construction types. For instance, in attachment A for linear underground and overhead projects, a lot of the content was very similar in the order, and we've decided to consolidate it all into the order and just leaving the requirements for the linear and underground overhead projects in attachment A. We've also reorganized attachments A, C, D, and E so that they flow through the minimum B&P requirements, the monitoring requirements, followed by the reporting requirements. So it's kind of just like a very chronological ordering of things as far as implementation goes. Compared to the 2009 permit, there are 4 new attachments, 1 for passive treatment, total maximum daily load implementation, ocean plan exceptions, and dewatering requirements. These attachments are separated out so that dischargers who need to implement these requirements can jump to that attachment rather than sifting through the requirements elsewhere in the permit. Appendix 1, which was previously an Excel spreadsheet, has been converted to a Word document which has improved its accessibility for our community members. The Word document does not have calculation capabilities, though dischargers will still be using SMART, our Stormwater Multiple Application and Report Tracking System, to input this information anyways. And most of the calculations don't really require anything fancy. All the formulas will be provided in the Word document. One thing I would like to note is that when you're using the PDFs that we have posted online, is that PDFs or Adobe Acrobat will allow you to navigate to the section that you are most interested in via using a contents panel. There you can select on various levels or section headings to locate the requirements that you're focusing on. And I found that very helpful. Next up, we'll be moving into passive treatment technology use requirements. So, treatment chemicals which cause the coagulation and flocculation of suspended solids are often used to meet the turbidity numeric action levels in our construction stormwater general permit. The 2009 CGP permit only addresses treatment chemicals that are used within an active treatment system, which are enclosed systems that can be monitored for toxicity prior to discharging that effluent. Passive treatment technologies differ from active treatment technologies as they are applied outside of these enclosed computerized systems without pumps, filters, or real-time controls. Regulatory requirements for passive treatment technologies are currently implemented in the US EPA general permit, as well as other states such as North Carolina and Washington, amongst other. The passive treatment technology requirements found in attachment G specifically apply to products or chemicals that are applied to water, such as sedimentation basins or within concentrated runoff streams. Stakeholders worked with State Water Board staff to develop the proposed requirements. The intent of the proposed passive treatment technology requirements is to prevent construction stormwater discharges from creating potentially toxic conditions in waterways by specifying which chemicals can be used, the design and application methods, monitoring, and reporting. The preliminary staff draft originally sought to impose requirements for passive treatment chemicals that were mixed into bonded fiber matrices, hydromulches, and spray tackifiers. But based on feedback that we have received from interested parties, staff determined that it would be more appropriate to remove that requirement from attachment G. Instead, we've incorporated those requirements specifically applying to bonded fiber matrices, hydromulches, and spray tackifiers in the erosion and sediment control minimum B&P section within the risk level attachments. Passive treatment chemicals can vary in active ingredients, dose amounts, application methods, and aquatic toxicities. They can take the form of liquids, powders, socks, and blocks, amongst other forms of applications. Dischargers should be familiar with the chemical's characteristics by reviewing safety data sheets, toxicological information, and the manufacturer's guidance and instructions. Commonly used cationic chemicals, such as positively charged polyacrylamines or PAMs, can be toxic to aquatic life and can enter the environment through stormwater runoff. Thus, they are prohibited by this proposed general permit. On the other hand, anionic or negatively charged and non-ionic or neutrally charged polyacrylamides are generally less toxic, but still have to be dosed properly to avoid adverse effects in our receiving waters. In the preliminary staff draft, we had proposed to involve the qualified SWIP developer heavily in the calculations to properly dose and apply passive treatment products. But we have heard that this is too burdensome for dischargers, who often hire knowledgeable contractors to follow manufacturer guidance and instructions when applying the products. And so we have made changes to the to attachment G to reflect that the discharger should be hiring and relying on experienced contractors who are familiar with the application of passive treatment technologies. Moving forward, we'll be discussing the implementation of adopted total maximum daily loads, otherwise known as TMDLs. Total maximum daily loads are existing regulations that have been through separate public processes when adopted into Regional Water Board water quality control plans to address Clean Water Act 303D listed impaired water bodies. These are water bodies that have been assessed and determined to have pollutants in such an amount that they've been impairing the beneficial uses of that water body. Total maximum daily loads are adopted by either the Regional Water Board or the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. A total maximum daily load is the sum of the allowable pollutants from all contributing point sources, non-point sources, background sources, and a margin of safety. Total maximum daily loads are not self-implementing and must be implemented through a permit or other board action. The existing permit order, the 2009 Construction General Permit, already includes a list of potentially applicable total maximum daily loads, though it is somewhat outdated and does not have any implementation requirements for our dischargers. The proposed general permit reissuance intends to update this list with existing TMDLs or total maximum daily loads that are applicable to construction stormwater dischargers and pair those with a set of implementation requirements. Total maximum daily loads assign waste load allocations to point sources. These are the maximum pollutant load from each point source that can be discharged to a water body. Stormwater discharges associated with construction activities regulated by this general permit are generally considered point sources of pollutants and are therefore assigned waste load allocations. We are proposing to implement 68 total maximum daily loads in this general permit, which represents a variety of pollutant categories, including indicator bacteria, chloride salts, diazinon, which is a pesticide, nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, sediment, temperature, metals, and other pollutants that are toxic to aquatic life. Many of these pollutants are associated with sediment, which is commonly discharged by construction projects as a result of their land disturbing activities. Responsible dischargers, which is a new term we were coining in, or I guess that was coined in the the industrial general permit, is going to be used in the construction general permit as well. And they are dischargers with coverage under the construction general permit who discharge stormwater associated with construction activities and authorized non-stormwater discharges that are discharged either directly or through a municipal separate sewer to impaired water bodies or watersheds that are listed within a US EPA approved total maximum daily load, and that have a waste load allocation that's assigned to those construction stormwater discharges. An important thing to note is that responsible dischargers are they have to identify one or more of the total maximum daily load specific pollutants in their site's construction stormwater discharges in order to be considered a responsible discharger. Due to the variety of pollutants and waste load allocations assigned to address them, staff developed multiple implementation strategies consistent with the assumptions and requirements of the total maximum daily loads. The intent was to streamline compliance by leveraging and modifying existing permit requirements where possible. Existing requirements such as pollutant source assessments, source control best management practices, soil loss modeling, otherwise known as Russell II, non-visible pollutant monitoring, and reporting are the basis for total maximum daily load implementation requirements. There are 4 categories of total maximum daily load implementation requirements. Compliance with the, number 1 being compliance with the general permit requirements, where those are already sufficient to comply with the total maximum daily load. All 4 of the categories must technically comply with the construction general permit requirements because they're all dischargers. The second category is compliance with erosion and sediment controls that are already identified within the general permit, and pair those with Russell II soil loss modeling to demonstrate compliance with mass-phased waste load allocations, which are typically assigned for total maximum daily loads that are seeking to address sediment or pollutants that are associated with sediment. The third category is compliance with total maximum daily load related numeric action levels to comply with concentration-based waste load allocations that are assigned within the receiving water. And lastly, the fourth category is compliance with total maximum daily load, related numeric effluent limitations to comply with concentration-based waste load allocations assigned at the point of discharge. So this is really assessing the effluent from your construction or the discharge from your construction site. Both the total maximum daily load related numeric action levels and effluent limitations are proposed for assessment through the non-visible pollutant monitoring requirements, which all dischargers are required to do when there is a breach, failure, or malfunction of a best management practice or a spillage of materials that can be transported by stormwater. One of the bigger changes in the May 2021 draft is that staff has redefined what it means to exceed a total maximum daily load numeric action level or effluent limitation. Instead of single sample limits, we defined an exceedance as being 2 or more analytical results per pollutant, per discharge location, per year that are over the value that is listed in attachment H, table H2. Which identifies the specific pollutant water body combination. This was based off similar implementation requirements that are included in the industrial stormwater general permit. Sorry, foot's falling asleep. The 68 total maximum daily loads assigned a total of 204 waste load allocations to specific pollutant water body combinations. The pie chart depicts how these 204 waste load allocations are split into implementation requirements. 28 or 14% of the total maximum daily loads are proposed to be addressed by complying with the general permit requirements, 8 of which intend to address bacteria total maximum daily loads by emphasizing the minimum best management practices regarding sanitation and really controlling those pollutant sources. That little one that's kind of outside of the circle represents one of the more unique implementation requirements, which is proposed for the Los Peñaquitos Lagoon sediment total maximum daily load. This total maximum daily load requires that dischargers submit an estimate of their discharges representative flow on an annual basis. 93, the yellow on the circle, or 45% of the total maximum daily loads are proposed for to be addressed by erosion and sediment controls paired with the Russell II soil loss modeling. 83 or 41% of the total maximum daily loads are proposed to be addressed by numeric action levels or numeric effluent limitations, shown in the blues. So the dark blue is numeric effluent limitations, and the lighter blue is numeric action levels. So this is kind of how we envision our dischargers implementing the adopted total maximum daily loads. Step one, they would have to determine their responsible discharger status. Does this project discharge to a total maximum daily load watershed or water body? A map tool will be provided to guide dischargers similar to existing guidance for the industrial stormwater general permit shown to the right. It's the discharger's responsibility to verify if their project discharges to the total maximum daily load watershed or water body. Secondly, they perform a site-specific pollutant source assessment. Does this site have sources of the specific pollutants that were listed in the total maximum daily load? Is there potential for those pollutants to be present in stormwater discharges? If not, then the total maximum daily load implementation requirements are not applicable to that discharger. They are not a responsible discharger. Those who have determined that they are responsible dischargers will refer to the proposed attachment H for applicable TMDL implementation requirements to determine what requirements are applicable to their specific site. All right, we'll be moving on to a whole slew of various other topics. First up, the proposed statewide water quality control plan requirements. Since the construction stormwater general permit was last reissued and amended in 2010 and 2012, the State Water Board has adopted statewide water quality control plans for oceanic waters as well as inland surface waters, enclosed bays, and estuaries. These water quality control plans function similarly to those adopted by the Regional Water Board, but apply to all of California. Likewise, the regulations, policies, and water quality standards established by the water quality control plans are implemented through other state water board orders, such as the construction stormwater general permit. The ocean plan, which was updated in 2019, requires the implementation of monitoring requirements for discharges directly into ocean waters. The monitoring requirements of the construction stormwater general permit are deemed compliant with the model monitoring requirements of the ocean plan. Additionally, the ocean plan prohibits the discharge of stormwater associated with construction activities to areas of special biological significance, unless that discharger has been granted an exception. The requirements for the dischargers that are granted an exception are in attachment I of the construction stormwater general permit reissuance. In 2015, the State Water Board amended the ocean plan and the statewide water quality control plan for inland surface waters, enclosed bays, and estuaries, and established a statewide water quality objective for trash, which would be a prohibition of trash in all discharges, and implementation requirements for stormwater dischargers to achieve that objective. The construction stormwater general permit reissuance proposes to implement a prohibition of trash discharges, aka zero trash. If a discharger cannot comply with the total prohibition of trash, there are requirements to install a full capture system or its equivalent to prevent trash from entering waterways. Moving on to proposed authorized dewatering activity requirements. The proposed permit defines and incorporates implementation requirements for construction site dewatering activities to build upon the US EPA 2017 construction stormwater general permit. However, dischargers subject to a separate National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, a de minimis permit, or a low threat discharge permit for their dewatering activities are required to obtain coverage and comply with the requirements of those separate permits. The requirements in attachment J are for projects with dewatering activities that are not already or that are not regulated under a separate permit. Dewatering discharges authorized by the proposed permit include mechanical pumping or siphoning of non-potable water from excavations, trenches, foundations, vaults, groundwater removal specifically related to construction activities, and or water collected in similar surface impoundments such as ponds, puddles, or other low parts of the site. The discharger would be required to comply with some specific dewatering discharge prohibitions, such as the no dewatering in contaminated groundwater areas, as well as regional water board requests, monitoring, and best management practices. The preliminary staff draft had some language that restricted what methods can be used to dewater without really a justification as why these prohibitions existed, such as the prohibition of using extraction wells to dewater. So we sought to address this by focusing on requirements that protected water quality rather than more of a prescriptive design. Next up, we have demolition activity requirements. The proposed permit incorporates additional implementation requirements for demolition activities to reduce the runoff of legacy pollutants such as asbestos, lead paints, and polychlorinated biphenyls, otherwise known as PCBs. The basis of these requirements were established in the US EPA 2017 Construction General Permit as well. Something to note here is that this applies to projects that require coverage under this general permit. So if they disturb 1 or more acres of land or are part of a larger common plan of development. However, if the demolition is occurring on, say, like a slab and the remainder of the project does not disturb soil, then that project would not need to comply with the requirements of the Construction Stormwater General Permit. The proposed notice of non-applicability criteria. California Water Code section 13399.30 allows a person to claim that they are not required to obtain coverage under a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit through a notice of non-applicability process. The proposed permit defines the requirements for a discharger submitting a notice of non-applicability to the water boards for sites hydrologically disconnected from waters of the United States. The dischargers would electronically certify and submit through the Stormwater Multiple Application and Report Tracking System, SMARTS, a technical justification that is prepared either by a California licensed professional engineer or geologist demonstrating a site does not discharge to waters of the United States. And a document, or they also have to submit a document signed by the Regional Water Board Executive Officer or their delegate, stating that Water Board staff concurs that the discharge's determination of them not being hydrologically connected to the waters of the United States. This technical justification was previously proposed to be performed solely by licensed California geologists, but it is well within the capabilities of licensed civil engineers to prepare this documentation as well. And so we have modified our language to reflect that in this May 2021 draft. There have also been some proposed revisions to the notice of termination process. A discharger must electronically certify and submit to the water boards a complete notice of termination and obtain approval to end their coverage under the Construction Stormwater General Permit. The proposed permit includes the following revised requirements to expedite regional water board approval and to reduce the financial burden on dischargers' continued compliance and annual fee payments. First, the discharger is required to provide additional project-specific information in the notice of termination, such as photo documentation, complete site maps, amongst other things. Secondly, an automatic 30-day approval of the notice of termination by the water board will be instated if the notice of termination is not otherwise under review or addressed by the regional water board. This is mostly the same as what was proposed in the preliminary staff draft. However, we have revised the language so that the qualified SWIP practitioner, rather than the qualified SWIP developer, can perform the notice of termination visual inspections. And that was based off feedback that we received from interested parties. Alrighty, so in the the proposed construction general permit, we plan to implement a new federal sufficiently sensitive test method rule. The US EPA has finalized minor amendments to its Clean Water Act regulations to codify that under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, where the US EPA has promulgated or otherwise approved of analytical methods, that dischargers must use sufficiently sensitive analytical test methods. The purpose of this rulemaking is to clarify that National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permittees must use US EPA approved analytical methods that are capable of detecting and measuring the pollutants at or below the applicable water quality criteria or permit limitations. This general permit requires the use of sufficiently sensitive methods to meet the requirements of the amended Clean Water Act as described above, and requires the dischargers to ensure all laboratory analyses are sufficiently sensitive and conducted according to the test procedures under 40 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 136, including the observation of holding times, detection limits, and other measures designed to ensure the quality assurance and quality control of these analyses. For any calculations required by this general permit, a value of 0 will be assigned for all analytical results less than the minimum level as reported by the laboratory, so long as the sufficiently sensitive test method was used. And this would be evidenced by the reported method detection limit. Measures to, that said, these requirements apply to samples that dischargers collect and send to laboratory for analysis. For the most part, construction stormwater dischargers perform field sampling for pH and turbidity, where properly calibrated instruments in the field comply with the sufficiently sensitive test method. An example of this rule, where this rule may impact dischargers, is through non-visible pollutant monitoring, especially when comparing their analytical results to the total maximum daily load, numeric action levels, and effluent limitations. Next up, we have proposed monitoring and reporting requirement revisions. Staff proposed revisions to the existing permits monitoring and reporting requirements as follows. The qualified SWIP developer, referred to as a QSD, and the qualified SWIP practitioner, referred to as a QSP, have increased requirements to visit the site, conduct visual inspections, and assess site conditions. The QSD and QSP are required to do on-site visual inspections at periodic intervals to observe potential changes to the construction site. The QSD will be required to inspect at the beginning of the project when a QSD has been replaced, twice annually, and within 14 days of a numeric action level exceedance. The qualified SWRC practitioner will be required to visit the site monthly prior to precipitation events, I believe 72 hours, within 14 days of numeric action level exceedances, and prior to the submittal of the notice of termination. In the preliminary staff draft, the discharger was required to collect stormwater samples during precipitation events that result in discharge, period. Any discharge would require precipitation events. After receiving feedback from our interested parties, we determined that any discharge was an impractical compliance trigger. Staff have since defined qualifying precipitation events as those that produce half an inch of precipitation within a 24-hour period, and these become extended events for subsequent 24-hour periods that have a quarter of an inch or more. This gives dischargers and enforcement staff a measurable amount to base their monitoring and implementation on. Staff determined that half an inch was an appropriate amount based on studies that concluded precipitation events tend to be more erosive when at least 4/10 of an inch in a 24-hour period are experienced at the site. Extended events are now defined at a quarter of an inch per 24-hour period after the initial half inch, so that dischargers with lighter precipitation that generally doesn't produce additional discharge do not have to continue to comply with the applicable monitoring requirements. In 2009, construction stormwater general permit, there was no duration associated with the amount of precipitation that triggered monitoring requirements. So by adding this 24-hour period, we think that it makes it clearer for dischargers to know when to get out into the field and monitor for BMP implementation and discharge sampling. Additionally, staff heard that single sample limits for pH and turbidity numeric action levels would be challenging for dischargers to comply with. Keeping them as daily averages, like the 2009 permit, promotes dischargers to perform real-time corrective actions and to improve their discharge before exceeding the numeric action level. And so we've reinstated that change as well. The 2009 permit contains bioassessment monitoring requirements intended to align with the proposed State Water Board biological integrity policy. However, that policy is still under development. Staff proposes to replace the current bioassessment monitoring requirements and use risk level 3 and type 3 linear underground and overhead project annual fees to fund bioassessment monitoring studies. This study would be conducted by the surface water ambient and monitoring program to determine if there is a significant water quality or significant risk to water quality, biological integrity, and watershed health but from high risk and large construction projects. The State Water Board could decide to include bioassessment or biological integrity requirements to implement specific water quality control plan policies through future permit reissuances. To be clear, we are not proposing additional receiving water monitoring requirements to replace the bioassessment monitoring requirements. The receiving water monitoring requirements for risk level 3 and type 3 linear utility and overhead, or linear underground and overhead project sites should be largely the same as compared to the 2009 permit, save for some clarifying revisions. We are also proposing to remove the rain event action plan requirements to provide dischargers a consistent on-site Staff determined that the goal of the rain event action plans should be action-based instead of checklist or reporting-based. And so in replacing the rain event action plans, we are proposing that the qualified SWIP developer be involved throughout the life of the construction project, that the qualified SWIP practitioner perform pre-storm inspections and visual observations, and that implementation of site-specific corrective actions is followed based on the qualified SWIP practitioner and qualified SWIP developers guidance. So what's next? We will be hosting another virtual workshop on the draft tomorrow, Thursday, June 10th. And as most recently noticed, the public hearing is now being rescheduled to August 4th, 2021, effectively extending the public comment period. This will allow interested parties more time to form their official comments and to be submitted to the clerk of the board. The public comment period will end on August 13th, 2021, initiating the staff's formal response to comment during the fall. A date for the State Water Board adoption meeting has not been determined yet, but we are anticipating sometime later this year and potentially early next year. I thought it might be nice to review how the State Water Board accepts comments for those that may be new to this process, such as myself. As a reminder, the full instructions for submitting comments can be found in the public notice that is posted to our Water Board website. Comments can be submitted orally during the board hearing or as written comment letters delivered physically or electronically. When emailing comment letters, please use the subject line specified in the public notice, which is comment letter - proposed construction stormwater general permit reissuance. An address is provided in the public notice for interested parties that are emailing their comments in. or sorry, that are mailing their comments in. If planning to hand deliver your comments, interested parties must notify staff via email and schedule an appointment for that transaction. Written comments will be accepted no later than 12 p.m. noon of Friday, August 13th, 2021. Nothing ominous about that date, Friday the 13th, but to stay informed, people or any person that is desiring to receive future notices concerning the proposed reissuance of this general permit, including any changes to this public notice, must sign up or should sign up for our LIRIS email list as follows. First, you should access the email list subscription form at the web address listed on our website or on this page. Secondly, click the water quality tab and then check the box for stormwater construction general permit issues. It will ask for your name and your email, and once you press submit, you'll be added to our subscription list. And with that, we will now begin our question and answer period. Amy Cronson will be facilitating the questions and feedback unless indicated by the participant that they would like to self-deliver the content. Thank you.
Great. Great presentation, Brandon. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information. So we have a few questions already in the chat, which is great. John Tarofskis, hi. So John asks, is that a daily site-wide average or discharge point average? And I believe he's referencing the averaging of samples taken on site.
Sorry, I was on mute. I believe it is a daily average for the specific discharge location.
Thank you. All right, and Bob here says the old permit used 48 hours of no rain as the break between rain events, also known as the antecedent dry period. Is the event now considered over as soon as we have any 24 hours with less than 0.25 inches of rain?
I believe it's 48 hours with less than 0.25 inches of rain.
Thank you. Okay, Drew says, I believe you said dewatering is prohibited in contaminated groundwater areas. Can you clarify what is meant by contaminated or how that is defined?
For that, I think we're relying on our dischargers to do an environmental assessment and look at what previous documentation and land uses and water quality or groundwater quality documentation that exists. That can generally be found through GeoTracker, right?
Yeah, GeoTracker would be the main source of that information. All right, so Chris asks, please go over QSD on-site involvement and the definition of the qualifying storm event.
Alrighty, so we are proposing to involve the QSD a little bit more on the site to make sure that the SWIP is being implemented correctly by the stormwater practitioner as well, or the SWIP practitioner and on-site staff. And so we have proposed that the qualified SWIP developer come out at the beginning of the project, I believe within the first 30 days, or if a qualified SWIP developer has swapped out from the project, a new qualified SWIP developer should come to that site and kind of learn more about the site-specific conditions that are happening. And then we believe that they should come twice a year, ideally before the typical wet season that we might encounter, and that may vary wherever you are in the state. And so I think we've incorporated requirements to visit the site between August and October, as well as January and March. And then they're also proposed to come after there is a numeric action level exceedance, I believe 14 days. And that is to kind of see what was happening on the site and to make sure that that numeric action level exceedance is prevented in the future. And then what was the second part, Amy?
The definition of the qualifying storm event.
Right. So one of our staff, Kate Silverhame, was doing some research on what we can use instead of saying any discharge. And we ultimately looked into some suggestions from interested parties. And one of those was incorporating a something measurable. So, like half an inch or a quarter of an inch within a certain time period. And based on some research that Kate did, we found that storm events tend to become more erosive around 0.4 of an inch within a 24-hour period. And so we've defined qualifying precipitation events as 0.5 inches within a 24-hour period. That triggers the event, and then that event is continued for each subsequent 24-hour period that has at least a quarter of an inch or more.
Yeah, and the reason we went with 0.5 inches instead of 0.4, which is the most precise, is that rain events are not measured in that type of a measurement. So it's either quarter or half. So,
and we've defined a forecasted precipitation event as well, and that's I believe 50% chance of 0.5 inches within 24-hour period.
All right. So the next one, and this seems like it might be an oversight, but the current draft has 3 separate definitions for a passive treatment system. I assume the definition found in draft attachment G is the correct one. We will definitely take a look at that, Andy. We had thrown around different terms throughout the life of this, and it's quite possible that we have conflated some. So thank you for pointing that out. The definition in the glossary, Appendix B, I believe, should be correct. All right. Marv asks, is the quarterly non-stormwater inspection still required?
I believe we removed the quarterly non-stormwater inspection. But we do have qualified SWRCB practitioners coming monthly now.
Okay. Oh, and then Andy's giving us the examples of the passive treatment definition. Thank you so much, Andy, for copying and pasting these in here. Yeah, so the Appendix 2 definition is the official definition in the glossary. The fact sheet is more of a description of, what these chemicals and products do. And then attachment G is the passive treatment attachment. And so we will make sure that those all gel together, Andy, and that everything follows the Appendix 2 definition, and that those terms are clear and repeated throughout the permit as the same thing if we mean the same thing. All right, Erica asks, will we need to re-enroll existing projects that are covered under the old CGP once the new CGP is adopted? Now, a lot of you folks are both in the industrial and construction world, so you may be familiar with how this was done with the industrial general permit back in 2015. The idea is similar for projects that are going to extend beyond into the effective date. You will need to recertify that project in SMARTS. It won't be a full re-enrollment. Can you elaborate on the changes to the notice of termination requirements? It appears the definition of 70% cover has been updated to eliminate the pre-project conditions.
I'll have to take a look at that one real quick. Is that the only question we have in the queue right now?
No, I can move on while you look through that.
Sure.
Okay, can you please go over the visual inspection requirement for the notice of termination? Is there an inspection form? Hi, Nicolette. There is no inspection form. We this is one of those areas where we want to allow for flexibility rather than being so prescriptive that you have one form that may not cover everything or is inadequate in any other way. So there's no new form. We do want a visual inspection for the notice of termination so that we can help our regional board colleagues out in terms of being able to see what's happening in SMARTS when the notice of termination is submitted so that they can process that a little bit faster. So if we have that, inspection report, we can take a look at that, take a look at photos, and process those quicker.
Alrighty, I pulled up the notice of termination section.
Great.
It says 70% final cover method. No computational proof required. Requires permanent vegetative cover to be evenly established over 70% of all disturbed and exposed areas of soils, so non-paved or non-built. In areas that have naturally low vegetative coverage, 70% of the natural conditions is acceptable. And so they'll have to provide photos of all site areas to verify compliance with the 70%. So it does look like the pre-construction requirements have been removed.
The pre-project conditions.
Yeah.
And then, all right, Sandy Matthews has a long question. Thank you, Sandy. We can always rely on you for the good detailed questions. Can you discuss the addition of the language regarding routine maintenance as it pertains to road projects? I found the addition of exposes underlying soil to be clarifying, but found the addition of pervious subgrade to be confusing. This is in section B, construction projects not subject to the general permit, item 1. What is meant by pervious subgrade? Is the base rock considered pervious? For newer pervious pavements, all the components, structural and base rock, is designed to be pervious. This may result in unintended consequences for pervious pavements. That's a great point, Sandy. We were trying to clarify those projects, and we found ourselves over the last 12 years saying over and over and over again, do you disturb the soil underneath, or is it just a grind and overlay situation? So that's what we meant to clarify. I see this issue with the pervious pavements, and we will need to clarify that in the permit. Maybe you can help educate us on some of those pervious pavements and the types of work that they're doing. I would say the general thought on this is that if you're going down to a subgrade that is erodible by stormwater, we want to make sure that you have BMPs and that you have coverage. If you're doing a grind and overlay situation where the sediment is not going to be transported or not transport pollutants, then that would be routine maintenance and no longer require coverage. We will definitely have to take a look at that, Sandy. That's a great question. Appreciate it. We have a question here. Any emerging contaminants that might possibly be added to the treatment list? This is a good question. There are emerging contaminants that the water boards are concerned about in general. We do not see that coming for the construction stormwater general permit unless they are part of a total maximum daily load. The construction stormwater permit generally deals with sediment and sediment bound pollutants and the control of sediment and thereby the control of sediment bound pollutants. That's not to say that an emerging contaminant that would be in a water body impairment or a total maximum daily load wouldn't make the list. Okay. Marv is asking, in the demolition section, is there a surrogate for asbestos sampling and limits for lead in lead-based paint? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't know if there's, I don't believe we have established a surrogate or a limit yet.
Correct. Yeah. This is just to control the pollutants from demolition of buildings that were built between 1950 and 1980. mostly looking at the presence of polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs. In the draft, I read risk level 1 sites no longer require weekly inspections. Is that still under consideration?
As in consideration of instating weekly inspections?
I'm not sure.
I think we ultimately decided to remove the weekly inspections for risk level 1 sites because we'll be having the qualified SWRCB practitioner come once a month at least, and then also within 72 hours before precipitation events. And we put 72 hours, I think it used to be 48, but 72 to allow the QSP to make some corrective actions before the precipitation event.
Okay. For dewatering, are areas where contamination is known assumed to need to be disposed of for treatment rather than discharged? So Angela, this is a good question. I think we will get several questions on dewatering and particularly about the contamination. But generally, I will say if there is contaminated water on your site, you would want to follow any rules or regulations, local, state, or federal, on the disposal of any hazardous waste or other contaminants. It's hard to say specifically on this, but if you have a project in mind or a scenario, feel free to put it in a comment letter or reach out to us via email, stormwater@waterboards.ca.gov, and we can noodle on that a little bit more. Thanks, Angela. Is there any additional, this is from Victoria, is there any additional training that existing trainers of record, qualified SWRCB developers, or qualified SWRCB practitioners will have to obtain once the new permit is adopted? Do you want to talk a little bit about that since you're part of the training team?
Yeah. So we've currently brought back the construction general permit training team who has been trying to develop a new curriculum for our trainers of records, qualified SWRCB developers, and practitioners for the new permit. And so what that looks like exactly, we don't have firmly established right now, but we are essentially what we're trying to capture is to revise the existing training criteria that we have, and then amend it with the new requirements that are being proposed or eventually adopted. And in doing so, there will need to be kind of a retraining of all of our qualified SWRCB developers and qualified SWRCB practitioners, and I guess as well as the trainers who are training them. And there will be a period in time between when the permit is adopted by the state water board and when it goes effective. And so during that time is when the construction general permit training team will be working with CASWA and Office of Water Programs to get our training program established, so that we can get our qualified stormwater professionals up to speed with the new requirements.
Great. Okay, so Chris has a technical question here. When a discharger has a numeric action level exceedance, you mentioned the QSD must visit the site within 14 days to assess the site and BMPs and make needed changes. In the last draft, it mentioned that QSD will need to do Russell calculations for NAL exceedances. Is that still required? An example is risk level 2 site with NAL exceedance from a storm event.
I think it was our intent to remove the Russell 2 modeling aspect of that numeric action level exceedance. We thought that might be too burdensome on dischargers because it does take a fair amount of time for the Russell 2 modeling.
Please confirm if the SWRCB no longer needs a separate or specific construction site monitoring program.
The SWIP should have the construction site monitoring program should be incorporated within the SWIP, and it should be specific to the site.
And it may just not have the same title or acronym, but we do want your sampling and monitoring information within the SWIP.
Mhm.
All right. Could the water boards consider waiving the TMDL requirements for emergency projects? For example, wildfire and landslide. Many pollutants can come from the natural disaster itself. Emergency projects are to protect public safety while restoring the site to pre-disaster conditions. Sampling non-visible pollutants and mitigating for numeric action level and numeric effluent limitations not caused by the construction activities themselves, but from the disaster would delay the project and not protect public interests.
Definitely see where this comment in question is coming from.
It's
I'm not
from Caltrans, by the way.
Caltrans. I'm not sure we have the authority to have that kind of waiver in the construction general permit. Does that sound right?
Yeah, there's a lot packed into that. One of them being, emergencies are treated generally differently. You may have cleanup activities that are governed by Cal Recycle or the Department of Toxic Substance Control. It may not be a construction project, but as Brandon was saying, yeah, the State Water Board has no authority to waive for emergencies, but we could adjust the regulatory requirements on a site-specific level at the regional boards. But yeah, in this permit, we don't have the authority to waive that for emergencies. There is some language in the permit about emergency projects, about when you need to file your permit registration documents, et cetera.
Hi, Amy. Hi, Amy.
Diana.
This is Diana. With that question that just came in, would you like to share your experience in previous years on how we dealt with wildfires and how we dealt with working with dischargers on the aftermath of wildfires?
Sure. Either I can or Brandon. It's up to you. It's kind of a passion point for Brandon.
Well, we've recently issued guidance, and it was kind of, I wouldn't say that recently, but with the onset of more devastating wildfires in our state, we've issued guidance to kind of assist discharges with their regulatory options, you could say, with complying with the construction general permit. And so that guidance, which is posted on our website right now, basically details that you have an ability to take samples of your stormwater discharges on a site that's been impacted by wildfires, and that's primarily defined by whether there's been a statewide or proclamation of a declaration of state of emergency. Is that right? Proclamation of state of emergency. There's some sort of official terminology for that. And then, geez, got to gather my thoughts on this one. But as Amy was talking about, sites that have been impacted, say they've burned down, the cleanup of that debris does not necessarily constitute construction activity. However, if you were to, after the site's cleaned up and then they're building it up again, if that still disturbs over an acre, then that would require coverage. And then there's options for dischargers to compare their sampling and to justify whether the say if a numeric action level was exceeded, state that's because of a significant ash deposit within your watershed or something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is Diane again. And I just want to add for that last question and comment. We don't know what's in our future here in California when it comes to disasters. We did not expect the wildfires we've had, like 10 years ago. And so we take these emergencies as they come. So this, this proposed permit contains requirements that will be in place just during normal times. And our water board takes what comes to us, whether it's pandemics, wildfires, anything, as they come, and the conditions, and what situation it does place our dischargers in. So that's a difficult question to address, or a difficult request to address kind of just broadly right now. We will look more into it if you'd like to make sure you document your concerns in your public comments.
Thank you, Diana and Brandon. So the next question here is, can the terms direct discharge, bypass, and upset, which are not defined in the glossary, be clarified? Absolutely, Marvin. We can clarify those and make sure that everything's in the glossary there. That was probably an oversight, so I appreciate that. Amber would like us to please go over the new requirements for a REAP, what needs to happen on site, and what does the QSD need to do?
So we're actually proposing to remove rain event action plan. So there's technically no requirements for the REAPs themselves. However, we do plan to have the qualified SWIP developer, come out on a periodic basis to make sure that the SWIP that they have developed is being implemented properly on the site. And then the qualified SWIP practitioner, we've required that they come prior to the qualifying or pre-storm, or pre-precipitation event, I guess we can say, and inspect the site and to make any corrective actions they need to in order to make sure that the BMPs, or best management practices, are being implemented correctly. And so that's kind of how we're seeing it, more as an action-based type thing instead of having sort of a checklist.
Thank you. And then a question about fees and WDIDs. I might have to check on the fee question. He says, do we need to pay fees when recertifying WDID after effective date? Will the project be given a new WDID number? The WDID number should stay the same if it's a continuing project. The annual fees should be the same. I'm not sure if your annual fee will be due upon recertification or during your normal billing cycle. My guess is the normal billing cycle, but I'm not completely sure on that.
Fees and WDIDs is also the name of my autobiography. So
what is
fees and WDIDs?
Fees and WDIDs, yeah. Mine too. Okay, how are you addressing school projects following city MS4 post-construction requirements, submittal of stormwater control plans, SWIPs, etc.? So we do not have anything specific for school projects, Heidi. As we all know, there are municipal separate storm sewer system permits, or MS4 permits, and those have a different set of requirements for stormwater for various types of projects and things in their jurisdiction. Any construction that is being done, whether it's a school or not, that's over an acre or part of a larger common plan of development will need permit coverage or a waiver. So part of this proposed draft construction permit states that you can do the post-construction requirements that are required by your local MS4 if it is permitted and they have post-construction requirements. And if you're outside of those areas, say a rural area where the county doesn't have post-construction requirements, then you would follow the water balance calculator and requirements in this draft construction stormwater permit. If there's a more specific question about this, Heidi, I would love to have you follow up with us. it can get pretty hairy between MS4 and CGP or the industrial permit. So I hope that answered it, but get back to me if I didn't.
And we probably want to loop in our municipal separate storm sewers unit as well.
Correct. Yeah,
That's
and the
right.
regional.
And this is Diana. And as our water board staff is developing proposed phase 2 municipal stormwater permit, which is the statewide permit, that's a reissuance of the existing statewide phase 2 municipal permit. We are considering the inclusion of school districts in that permit. But of course, that is not during construction. That is the standard municipal stormwater permit.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Kim asks, in the 2009 permit, oh, sorry, I also got confirmation on the fees and WDIDs. Patrick is listening in the background. Thank you, Patrick. So there will be no fee due for the recertification, and the billing cycle will remain the same. So you'll have to pay your annual fees on your billing cycle. Okay, in the 2009 permit, it specified that this permit would include projects that are over an acre of earth moving work. I noticed the earth moving language was removed. So would a project need to be enrolled when they are demolishing a building over an acre but keeping the foundation?
I'm not sure that the earth removing work language is supposed to be removed, but I think during our intent is that only projects that do require this permit coverage or this permit are required to follow those demolition activity requirements. And so I think I mentioned this during the presentation, but if you're demolishing a building that's on a slab or you have the foundation there, then you would likely not require coverage under this general permit unless also part of that project was to go underneath that slab and expose the soil.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and the demolition requirements are looking at, again, those particular years, 1950 to 1980. And I believe if we don't say earth moving, we definitely do say land disturbances.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that clarifies. A comment here from Heidi: oftentimes cities are not receiving notice of project or even documentation before a school project is approved in SMARTS. So that's kind of out of the scope of this a little bit. I'm not sure what the cities are wanting in terms of school projects. I know that there has been a lot of discussion between the office of, I believe it's not the office of the state engineer, that's a different state that I worked in, but there's the
state architect.
State architect, thank you. And so Heidi, if you want to reach out, we can talk about schools. All right. Can you confirm the definition of dewatering discharges from Appendix J? Does it mean discharges to land or surface water from dewatering activities? Yes, dewatering discharges does mean discharges from dewatering activities.
And so that could be technically to land or just to our receiving waters. Basically considered, what is our normal discharge considered?
Yeah, and this permit covers discharges to waters of the US. This is an interesting question from Matthew. How were costs associated with the demolition protection of materials accounted for in the evaluation of this requirement? If so, what were the cost impacts that were deemed to be an acceptable level? Matthew, we did not do this level of analysis on cost specifically associated with demolition. We are implementing a federal national pollutant discharge elimination system permit. We are required to meet the standard that US EPA adopts in their federal construction general permit. And then we can go more stringent from there. The demolition requirements were included in the 2017 federal construction general permit. So that sets the baseline for this, unless for some reason a new federal permit is released, adopted, and effective before this draft is. It seems like there might be a more specific question in regards to cost and demolition protection of materials. I might be missing it. Please feel free to reach out for more specifics or even specify more in the chat box if you're inclined. Do you have anything to add to that, Brandon? No? Okay. Why does the permit limit sampling of non-visible pollutants to unprotected demolition sites to structures built between 1950 and 1980? Asbestos and lead were extensively used in structures before 1950. So that's true. Go ahead, Brandon, if you have a better way to say this.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think that might have been just a misspoken thing. Asbestos and lead paint and other demolition materials that we'd want you to assess for in your pollutant source assessment don't have that time limit, but the PCBs do. So PCBs were used between 1950 and 1980, and that's why if you're demoing something during that time frame, we would want to focus on that. And I think this is something it was noted in two different spaces within the preliminary staff draft, and I ultimately decided to choose the one that was more expansive. So the one that was saying that, you know, legacy pollutants besides PCBs, if you're demolishing something from 1920, you're going to want to know what's in those buildings too. But for PCBs, it's specifically 1950 through 1980.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay. Will projects already registered in SMARTS have to be changed to the new standards, or will they be grandfathered into the system? Some of these projects may take a few years to complete, such as linear utility projects. So this is a great question, Edward. As written now, they would have to meet the new standards as of the effective date of the permit. We have heard comments on the extension of the existing permit requirements for projects that are already in progress, or, you know, certain stages of planning. That is something that we're still contemplating. I understand that it could be difficult and costly to comply, you know, at the effective date with the new requirements. One thing I will say is that staff have the opportunity to recommend an effective date to the board. Ultimately, the board makes the decision, but staff typically recommends at least 1 year between the adoption date and the effective date of the new permit. Okay, we have a question here from Rosanna about the surface water buffer. Could you elaborate on the requirements for the surface water buffer? It's entirely possible that a natural buffer may not exist under many conditions, such as on an already developed or redevelopment that prompts need for coverage under the CGP. Natural buffers at construction sites at the water edge, for example, a large single-family home on the beach, beachfront property, are unlikely to pre-exist. Yes, Rosanna, that is true. The 50-foot buffer is a requirement unless it's infeasible, and then there are alternative requirements, including BMPs, sediment and erosion control in that section of the permit. Oh, here's a good question from an insider, Marv, thank you. He's asking whether the Sac State Passive Treatment Study Program information is included in this draft. Currently, the Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State is doing a study on passive treatment and passive dosing of chemicals for flocculating and coagulating sediment out of stormwater. That study is not complete, Marv, so I can't say that it was included in this draft because it has not been completed, but we have worked closely with the folks at Office of Water Programs, as well as many folks on the Technical Advisory Committee for passive dosing, and generally trying to capture the spirit of that work and the technical information that was provided to us. Okay. In order section N, conditions for notice of termination, we say minimize the risk of wildlife entrapment. Oh, sorry. He says disregard that previous comment. Never mind. Thank you, Matthew.
Oh, I was kind of curious.
Okay, a 50% chance of ½ inch of rain occurring within 24 hours, according to NOAA, triggers the pre-storm. Qualifying precipitation event continues as long as there is 0.25 inches predicted for the subsequent days, according to NOAA. Conduct post-storm when less than 0.25 inches of rain is predicted. Correct? Sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding the question. I think he's asking.
So it's a clarification on the forecasted and qualifying precipitation event. And I think what he said was correct. And so the post-storm inspection would be conducted with 48 hours after the last extended day. No, is it within 48 hours, or I have to double check on that one, but is it within or at least 48 hours after that last quarter inch day?
Yeah, and I think he's asking if they would conduct the post-storm inspection as soon as there is less than 0.25 inches predicted.
Oh, I see. We might have to mull that one over a little bit, but I think that could technically work out if the next day, so say, the first day it rains ½ an inch, the second day it rains ¼ inch, and then it rains less than ¼ inch, and then the next day is predicted to have less than ¼ inch. I think it might be reasonable to say that they can do a post-construction inspection, but we'll have to look into that a little bit more.
Okay. In attachment D, section K4, I believe that's the SWIP, it states that there's a checklist. Is this checklist different from the REAPs?
I think it's the inspection checklist, which isn't necessarily a REAP, and since there's no REAPs anymore, I would have to say it's different.
Okay.
But I can look into that too.
Okay. Oh, just jumped down. Here we go. Okay. If this is a new permit, shouldn't all permits be issued new and the R value on the project start at 0 when calculating risk associated with existing projects? This would help mitigate some of the new added costs for projects that are close to completion. A current risk level 2 may become a level 1 per remaining time of the project. Matthew, that is a good point. Unfortunately, risk is calculated from the start of the project through the end of the project. And so even if you were to sell the project to somebody else, to sell that site, they would have to calculate the risk based on the beginning of the project when soil was disturbed. So it would be nice if we could start at 0, but that project's already been ongoing and the risk is the same. So, okay. Sorry, I'm reading this one.
Sure.
Okay, so here's a question. The EPA's CGP qualifying rain event has been 0.25 inches since 2012, and the minimum for a visual inspection is every 14 days. Was there a reason our CGP opted to not go to the 0.25 inch on the qualifying rain event and the 14-day requirement on risk level 1 visual inspections? So to answer that, Yolanda, we pulled data from California, rainfall data. It was modeled to find the most erosive storm event. And that most erosive, or when there's a potential to be erosive, was found to be 0.4 inches within a 24-hour period. So we're getting at rainfall intensity. So it's a little bit different from how EPA does it just in general. We're approaching rainfall intensity, erosion, and discharge rather than a storm size, if that helps. And then in terms of the 14-day requirement on risk level 1 visual inspections, that was open to what we thought would be most helpful. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there, derailed. That would be most beneficial with the structure that we already have in place with qualified SWIP developers and qualified SWIP practitioners. The California specific permit differs greatly from the US EPA CGP in that way. We have kind of a different way that we handle a lot of this stuff. So that's why it is that way. Yolanda, I believe this is Yolanda that I know and worked with many years ago, but we can definitely have a side conversation about that. And if you have any suggestions or specific comments on that, we're definitely open to hearing them.
And our risk levels kind of factor in that too. So risk level 2s and risk level 3s are still doing those weekly inspections, but they don't necessarily have to be a QSP.
Right, they can be delegated by the QSP. And Brandon, believe it or not, that is the last of the questions here in the chat.
Oh, well.
So I want to encourage folks to submit questions. I'm going to check in with Ella here and see, Ella, did we get any emails with questions that that folks were wondering about that maybe they weren't in the Zoom meeting or something?
Hi, Amy. No, I don't have anything right now, but we could double check during the break if we still have a break.
Okay, great. And then, okay, we're getting a few more questions in here. That's great. So Sandy asked if we can review the proposed schedule. Absolutely, Sandy, we'll do that at the end. And then someone said, please consider preparing a document that specifically lists the changes that were made to the permit. I think most people know the old permit by heart by now, and their understanding of this permit would be much more efficiently understood. That's a great suggestion. We are working on that. I'm not sure if it will be, an official document of this permit, but I know it would be very helpful to all of the stakeholders and interested parties. Oh, and then Jeff, this is a compliment for you, Brandon. Jeff just said the PDF bookmarks in the draft document are greatly appreciated. So Brandon worked really hard to make sure that you could navigate through that PDF by going through the navigation pane and clicking on each section. That helps a lot. But back to this person's comment, we will definitely try to work on something like that. I think it would be helpful for our regional board colleagues as well, to understand the differences, as well as all of the stakeholders and interested parties here, and folks that interact with the permit.
And I can touch upon that too. We actually did assign this as a project to one of our scientific aides here at the State Water Board. And it was a grueling process of him having to go through and literally like read each page and compare the language, because of the substantial changes between like formatting changes and reorganization between the preliminary staff draft and the 2009 permit. However, between the preliminary staff draft and this 2021 draft, May 2021 draft, there's also been a very substantial reorganization. So we did try to provide that, but the way that we organized it would probably confuse a lot of people because all the sections got messed up. So we'll try and do that again, but we have to figure out when the most appropriate time to do that is. If we're going to continue making substantial changes to the permit, it's probably better that we hold off on preparing that at the moment.
Yeah, typically we just do a summary of the significant changes, which is in the fact sheet. And so that might be helpful to you as well. Anything beyond that would be kind of above and beyond as a helpful thing for folks. So, as time permits, we will work on that. And I appreciate that sentiment. I think it would be helpful. Okay. Let's see. I lost where I was here. Did you say that the pre-rain inspections need to be done by the QSP and not delegated?
Yes, I did. So it is one of the qualified SWIP developers' new duties, or sorry, not developer, practitioner, new duties to be there on site more frequently. And we've required that be at least once a month, and then also 72 hours before a pre-storm inspection. And so those inspections can actually be the same one. So say they have a rain in October, they come for that precipitation event inspection. That covers their monthly inspection. But if they have a second rain event, maybe a couple weeks later in October, the QSP would come out again as well. And so what we're trying to achieve there is to have a balance where the QSP, instead of coming every 14 days, is coming once a month. And say, drier months, they don't necessarily need to be out there as often. But then when that pre-storm inspection requirement comes along, that's going to have their presence more frequently. And so we think that's a good balance for qualified SWIP practitioners. And we really see them as vital to implementing the permit and trying to achieve compliance with it.
Great, thank you. And Sandy's asking, will a new notice be issued? Yes, Sandy, a new notice was posted already today on the board's website. The LIRIS message has not gone out yet, but I would expect that soon. But you can view the new public notice with the August 4th hearing date and the August 13th end of public comment.
So we effectively extended the public comment period by what, 13 days?
Yeah, a couple weeks. And then Matthew, thank you for this helpful tip. Section E of the fact sheet outlines significant changes. So that's what I was discussing. It's in E of the fact sheet. And then Brandon, what inspection types are QSP delegates prohibited from doing?
I would say refer to order section. Let's see, I'm pulling out my table of contents. Oh, I'm in the wrong document. Go to the discharger roles and site personnel section. So that's going to be, I believe, section 5. And under there, it's going to have inspections that only QSPs and QSDs are going to, or that are required to do or be done by QSDs and QSPs. Delegated individuals can perform inactive site inspections. And so we actually have a new provision in there for sites to switch to this inactive site status and reduce their monitoring schedules. And so trained individuals can do, or trained delegates can do those inspections. Trained delegates can do during storm inspections, and trained delegates can do post precipitation inspections.
Thank you, Brandon. And then we have another question here about whether the risk assessment calculations are still the same as the existing permit. And yes, they are. We have not changed the way that we assess risk with the R factor, LS factor, and K factor. That is remaining the same. And risk the risk levels are the same, risk levels 1, 2, and 3, and LUP type 1, 2, and 3.
Mhm.
There's a third type. Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
And we've, I mentioned this during the presentation, but we switched from a Excel spreadsheet to a Word document that's kind of written more like almost like, one of our guidance documents that has you walk through the different ways you can calculate your risk. So there's an individual method where the discharger is, pulling some site-specific factors, but there's also the GIS method, or geographical information
Geographical
systems.
information system.
Yeah. And that's what SMARTS is based off. And so it will, Appendix 1 will run you through those processes. And we've actually updated some guidance for using the US EPA's low rainfall or small construction rainfall erosivity calculator. Because the programming with that has changed slightly, so it only calculates the R factor for up to a 365-day period. So dischargers will actually be, with multi-year projects, will have to actually cut their R factor into different segments and then sum those R factors up for the duration of projects that are that span over multiple years.
Which is very similar if you've done it the old paper way.
Mm-hmm.
You just go across for 1 year and then you add the years together. Okay, one last question here. So if you're sitting on questions, you're not sure if you want to ask it, go ahead and get in that chat box. All right, Javier's the first one. Thank you. We'll get to Mark's question first. The pesticide applications to soil and termite treatments are required to be covered with plastic. This seems a bit challenging to implement. Yeah, Marv, I think it is a bit challenging to implement. I do look forward to comments on this section. I know that this is typically done when specifically termite pesticides are applied. They'll either cover it or pour the foundation within a reasonable amount of time. What we're really looking at here is making sure that those pesticides don't run off into the stormwater if applied inappropriately. And then regarding documentation of permit changes, the fact sheet does not provide an explanation of changes. So we do have that summary of significant changes in the fact sheet. It is more of a summary and it's narrative rather than the list that was suggested. Sean is wondering, is the NOAA forecast authority still? I think you're asking if that's who we go with in terms of forecasting. It is. That's the federal administration that deals with the forecasting. Someone wants to know why a consultant cannot be a duly authorized representative. If a small business owner hires a QSD to prepare the SWIP, why cannot that QSD or consultant be the duly authorized representative to upload to SMARTS? The reason there is that the authorities for legally responsible person, duly authorized representative, are federally defined. They want to make sure that you truly do have that authority. It can be quite a legal challenge and an expensive thing to pursue if you are certifying those documents as a duly authorized representative. I don't recommend that a consultant try to be a duly authorized representative. It's probably not a great place for them. I do see the challenge though. It's difficult to get the legally responsible person to get into SMARTS and to sign these things. But it's good to remind that legally responsible person of the legal and financial impacts of not certifying these things appropriately or delegating the authority for that person appropriately. Oh, this is a great question, Jeff. Please clarify the difference between this draft permit and a tentative permit and what that means going forward. That's a great question, Jeff, because this is the first time that we've done it this way. So in November, we issued a preliminary staff draft that did not carry with it an associated public comment period or the consideration of written comments. It was not a board action, and we didn't take it to a hearing. That simply was kind of an informational and a subject for discussion. So we released that so that we could reach out to stakeholders and interested parties to get initial thoughts, reactions, feedback on that draft. I recognize that it's been 12 years now since we've issued this permit, and a lot of things have come up. A lot of things have changed. The climate has changed. And so we really wanted to use that as a jumping off point for stakeholder engagement, which we did. We had many, many meetings with stakeholders based on comments and questions that we received during those workshops in December. So now this is a draft permit. It is out for a public comment period. It's been publicly noticed. The typical way forward is that during the public comment period, we receive written comments and verbal testimony at the public hearing in front of the water board members. And then we will do a formal response to comments where we consider all of the comments received during that formal public comment period. We make the necessary changes to the draft and additions and edits, and then it will go out for a public adoption hearing in front of the board, where they will still hear more verbal comments, concerns, questions, and then they'll consider the adoption of this permit, as well as considering anything like the time for until it's becomes effective. Oftentimes at those hearings, they will have questions for staff, as well as questions for the stakeholders and interested parties that are there before them. So that gives them an idea of whether they want to adopt it, under what circumstances, and what the effective date will be. Okay. Reduced frequency inspections for inactive sites require authorization of the change of information. Will there be a time limit for authorization of the change of information?
I suppose that's something we consider, but there is currently not a proposed time limit for this change of information.
Okay. Matt wants to know, is a QSD also considered a QSP still? And can a QSD fulfill the QSP roles? Absolutely, Matt. Yep. If you are a QSD, you are also a QSP. That's Qualified SWRCB Developer and Qualified SWRCB Practitioner, where SWRCB means Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. I'm sorry, it's the very end and I haven't defined that acronym yet, but I appreciate your patience. Okay, and then I have another comment here where they said that the fact sheet explains the changes but does not show all the changes. And they would like me to respond to the point that it does not provide a useful means of understanding permit changes. Please look at this from the standpoint of someone who is a discharger. We are required to follow the letter of the law, and that does not appear in the fact sheet. So yeah, it's a summary of significant changes. It's a narrative summary. As stated before, we'll do our best to outline those changes. At this point, what we can do is provide the existing 2009 permit and this proposed draft, and you have all the changes there. I'm not suggesting that you should go and personally do the comparison, but we will do our best there. But I also recommend that you really take a look at the permit in detail and find the things that are important to you and the differences between the existing draft and the current to see if there's something that's really not going to work for you. And then we'll take those comments. But everyone's interests are different. And so, you may catch something that another stakeholder, interested party, or State Water Board staff doesn't catch. So again, we'll do our best. But for right now, we just have the summaries of significant changes, and that is what we're required to do. So, okay, on smarts, there is always an e-signature requirement for certification of documents. NOI, that's the notice of intent, change of information, notice of termination, etc., by a legally responsible person or duly authorized representative, also previously known as the approved signatory. However, there is no e-signature requirement for the QSD. When inputting information for a notice of intent, the data entry person can input any QSD's credentials for the project without receiving formal certification by that QSD. This has become an issue when the QSD for the project is updated because many times the QSD field, lost my place. The QSD field in the Notice of Intent tab is not updated as well. This can also result in QSDs being linked to projects without their knowledge. Has consideration been given to adding a QSD e-certification requirement to SMARTS? I can't say we've made that consideration directly, but that is a great point, Victoria. I really appreciate this comment. I'm going to take this back to our SMARTS coordinator, Patrick Otsuji, and see what we can maybe work out there. I certainly would not want a QSD linked to a project that they're not involved with. Okay. Checking on my other chat box over here. Are there any risk levels that require weekly inspections, Brandon?
I believe the risk level 2s and 3s do.
Thank you.
And there should be a table within those attachments that show which what frequency they'll need to do inspections.
Okay. Great question, Kim. So in section K4B, the dewatering section of the order, it states that prior to the beginning of a dewatering discharge, they shall notify the applicable regional water boards of the anticipated dewatering discharge. Is it possible to add language to also inform the local MS4? Kim, that is a great question. We will think about that. We typically don't dictate communication between the discharger and their MS4 simply because they have different requirements, additional requirements, and sometimes fewer requirements. It just really depends. I do understand the issue you're getting at here, where the MS4 really needs to be aware of what's happening in their jurisdiction. And I can appreciate that. So we will mull over this one a little bit. And again, feel free to reach out to me directly. There have been several MS4 questions here, and we have a separate permitting team for the municipal separate storm sewer system discharges, and they have separate permits as well that interact with this. So however we can make that interaction more clear, we would be happy to. Okay, here's one on QSD QSP. Section BG1 includes QSP and QSD prerequisite course certificate license qualifications, but they are still very limited. If the state board must include an underlying certificate, then there should provide, my screen just jumped. A wide array of options from a variety of organizations as acceptable paths to become QSD QSP certified. Some additional courses rely on trainer of record to send in information on programs. Can these be expanded and approved in advance of the permit reissuance and not be reliant on trainers of record to submit? So this is a great question. We will be working with the construction general permit training team to make sure that all of our training requirements are addressed and rolled out as necessary. We have expanded the prerequisites a little bit in this draft. But we'll continue to consider that. Brandon, do you want to add anything on that training? You're pretty heavily involved.
Yeah, I was going to say that we actually have kind of the ability to amend the list of prerequisites during our during the permit cycle. So we've included a provision that says any prerequisite course approved by our Division of Water Quality Deputy Director can be considered a viable course for their QSD and QSP prerequisite. And so how we go through that approval process, we're still working out with the construction general permit training team. We might have our members review the offering, the training offering, and provide a recommendation to the state water board, and then it'll ultimately probably be up to our staff as well as our recommendations to our deputy director in order to get that approved as a prerequisite. And so the way I see this playing out is, oh, are we still taking a break?
We only have two more questions.
Yeah, we can power through it.
Folks want to take a break and come back?
Amy, this is Diana. Can I touch on one question that was asked before we take a break?
Sure. Sorry.
Okay. Sure. No, it's just fresh on my mind. The comments / question about the coordination with the MS4 in regards to dewatering, that really struck me because as we develop and adopt other statewide NPDES permits for utilities, and a lot of those discharges do either go into MS4s or maybe threaten the discharge of a MS4 system. We are looking more and more to requiring coordination among the utilities. And so I just want to thank you for that comment. I don't see who made that comment, but we'll definitely put more thought into the need for a construction stormwater discharger to coordinate with the MS4, especially if their discharge is going into an MS4 system. So I just wanted to add that little tidbit.
Thank you.
Great. Sounds good. And so it looks like people want to just power through it, especially if we're almost done. It doesn't really seem necessary to take a break. But yeah, going back to
we have one question left.
Okay, and I think we might have a few more in our chat, separate chat too. So.
Okay. So the change of ownership section states prior to sale of site, parcel, or lot, the discharger shall submit a notice of termination and the new owner has been notified of a CGP coverage requirement. I assume this applies to unstabilized lots and doesn't apply to homeowners that buy a completed home lot. Also, can a notice of termination now be submitted for a part of the project if the overall site is not being submitted for termination? This is currently only done through a COI form. Thank you, Holly. So the transfer of ownership applies where there is soil disturbance still that meets the permit requirements. So it's not, when you buy a home that's completed and the site is stabilized, that homeowner does not need to get coverage. If there's, areas that are not stabilized or it's an ongoing project and they sell that project to somebody else, in that case, they would need to get coverage. Mm-hmm. And we have not considered changing the reduction of acreage from a change of information process to the notice of termination process. That should remain the same.
Was that previous part of that question kind of responding to like greater subdivisions where they purposefully leave like backyards unfinished? Did we lose Amy?
Yes, we lost Amy.
Oh, no.
Brandon, can you go ahead and answer that?
Let's see. I have to figure out because I
Okay.
don't have
Otherwise,
the
we'll
chat.
make sure we get that response back. To the
Sure.
person.
Yeah. I mean, if you're always welcome to email our Stormwater help desk, and I'm sure we'll be answering a lot of questions during the comment period, and we'd be happy to. We have some additional questions that came in via email. Are the erosivity waiver requirements, oh, this is from Andy McKinney. Are the erosivity waiver requirements still the same? I.e., is it less than 5 acres and less than 5 R factor? And the answer is yes, those are still the same. One of the changes from the preliminary staff draft, and it was a minor change, with potentially big impact actually, was that we were actually going to prohibit the use of waivers for sites that were not risk level 1, so risk level 2 and risk level 3s. And we actually decided to remove that prohibition out, and so therefore all sites can still use the waiver under the May 2021 drafts. Amy, you're back.
Mm-hmm. And Brandon, I see a question here regarding utility vaults. And so let me go ahead and answer that one. So the question is, here, let me put my video on so you can see me. Utility vault discharges have a separate utility vault dewatering permit, which is a 2014 statewide NPDES permit. My understanding is that they obtain coverage under that permit if their dewatering is not related to construction, correct? Yes, that is correct. The dewatering of utility vaults is permitted under a 2014 statewide NPDES permit specifically for utility vault dewatering.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, and then one last question here, anonymous. Once someone qualifies and becomes a QSP or QSD, they have shown that they have experience and permit knowledge. So why are individuals required to continue to maintain those underlying credentials used to qualify initially? It's a good question. I would say, generally it's because things change. We would want you to maintain that, knowledge and understanding of erosion and sediment control, or whatever your underlying certificate is. And then, sorry, I'm just double checking the chat boxes here to make sure we haven't missed anything.
Amy, before we
Yes.
lost you, there was a question about backyards. Brandon, do you want to repeat that question for Amy to answer or try to answer?
Sure. So I think it was kind of touching upon the question that you were answering while you did get cut off. And it was referring to change of ownership when a site may not be stabilized yet.
Yes.
Yes.
And I didn't, break my router so that I didn't have to answer that question, I promise. Sorry about that interruption there. So there has been some concern in the past about large subdivisions where they leave the yards front and back unlandscaped when they sell the homes to the homeowner. Some regional board staff are concerned about and have witnessed the kind of mass sedimentation and erosion on those sites during storm events. And so, excuse me, we'd like to address that as much as possible and make sure that those sites are stabilized prior to the notice of termination. I think the question was more about whether a fully stabilized site could be transferred and if that new owner would need coverage, in which case if it's fully stabilized, no. But in a situation like that where you have a large subdivision and are going to leave lots of that land still disturbed or unstabilized, I would encourage you to work with the regional water board on your notice of termination to make sure that you meet the requirements of that.
Mm-hmm. And if you have suggested language regarding that type of scenario, we'd be happy to take a look at it. I think other states have something to address it, and so we'll be looking at that as well.
And then last question here for the erosivity waiver: is the acreage based on the total acre of disturbed soil or the total site size? That is the disturbed acreage.
Mm-hmm.
And then Yolanda asks, as a SciSec instructor, we found that a lot of individuals did not keep the prerequisite current and were still operating as active QSPs. Will Office of Water Programs or CASQA better manage underlying certificates being active? That's a great question. We will bring that up to the Construction General Permit Training team with the Office of Water Programs and CASQA, and see if there's a different plan there. All right, and that is the last question I have in here. So, I'll make some closing remarks here. If you get a question in during that time, we'll still answer it. But thank you all so much for coming to this workshop. Again, we have another one tomorrow that starts at 8:30 a.m. It's the same information that you got today, so no need to do both. But if you missed something and you'd like to join that one, you're welcome to. I'd like to thank Diana Messina, the section chief here at the State Water Board, for the surface water permitting section, as well as my staff, Brandon Rosenboom here, Ella Galovi and Tiana Huling, who have been working behind the scenes, as well as our AV staff and our Office of Chief Counsel attorneys. And then if you all have further questions or you'd like to get into the weeds about something, I've already offered that up for some of the MS4 issues. Please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Brandon. Our contact information is on the screen here. You can also email stormwater@waterboards.ca.gov, and those emails will come to us directly to respond to if you can't remember our names or something like that. This process is always a pleasure. I appreciate everyone for being engaged, and I hope we can continue to engage throughout this process. Again, we have the close of public comment period August 13th. We have our hearing, thank you, Brandon, our hearing for verbal public comments, as well as more written comments on August 4th. And we have a new public notice up on the website that's been revised as of today with this information. But you'll also, if you're subscribed to any of the LIRIS lists, you'll see that coming out soon as well, as a reminder. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great afternoon.